Hi, everybody.
Hi, how are
Hi.
you?
Hi, Cindy. Thank you all so much for inviting me in. I'm zooming in here from a cabin in Maine where we just got the internet hooked up a couple of years ago, and it looks like it seems okay so far.
Yeah,
Yes.
no, it looks
Great,
great.
great.
So we have
Um,
another Maine resident that's on as well. Michelle Beckwith lives in Maine too.
oh, hey, hi, neighbor. How's it going?
I I'm up in Blue Hill. Um,
Okay, I'm in a little pond, flying pond near the Belgrade Lakes area,
okay.
kind of inland.
Almost
Yeah.
closer to civilization than I am.
Yeah, and we've had a really rainy summer, but it's summertime now. We've had some nice weather. Where's everyone else? Are you all together, or is everyone coming from different places here?
Kind
Utah.
of all over. Yeah, I was gonna
Oh
say Melody's
wow.
in Utah. I'm in Texas. So there's several of us are in Texas, but people are from all over. I can let them all chime in. Sorry.
Oh, so cool. Well, thank you all so much for inviting me. It's really flattering, and it's such an honor. So thank you.
Well, we were all just talking about how much we really enjoyed the book and what a clever premise, and just we just have so many good questions for you. So,
Oh, thank
um, but why don't we just start with an easy one? Tell us how you decided to write this book, like where the idea came from and how that came about.
Sure. Yeah. I was actually, so this was 2018. I was working summers installing solar panels. And funny enough, one of the jobs we did was in Blue Hill. So I have been there one time, but it was mostly in the mid coast area. I'm a teacher. I've been in education for years and years, but in summers, I've had some really odd jobs. And so I got into solar. I grew up in the woods of New England, and I've always cared a lot about nature and the environment. And like a lot of people have been pretty worried about the climate and just felt like, I don't know, I wanted to try to do something. So I just learned the basics of installing solar panels. I worked for one summer on the mid coast in Maine, and I really loved it. It was really fun. I like working with my hands, and it was beautiful. As they say, like the view from the office would be the most gorgeous locations. Um, and it was really fulfilling. But so 2018 happened to be this time nationally when there was a little bit of hope for the climate. There was this idea floated for what they called the Green New Deal, which was going to mobilize, if it ever passed, like tens of millions of workers, kind of like the New Deal during the 30s, to install solar and wind and everything. And so I started imagining what it would be like if this passed and I enlisted with it, and how fulfilling that might be, as like what a way to spend, I don't know, 5 years of my life or something. I'd start fantasizing, like imagining telling my grandkids years from now, like I was part of the mobilization. And so obviously that didn't happen, but then the fiction writer in me just ran with it. And so that became Larch. I was working on the mid coast of Maine. I'd also worked really briefly for someone who forages seaweed. And so all those things kind of coalesced together, and became Larch's character. And I just ran with it as like, what would it feel like to be part of this mobilization? Especially if you had lost everything and it kind of became your family. I was thinking a lot about, I think what a lot of people feel about in the military, that sense of camaraderie and purpose. And then I work so much with kids that even though I started writing it, when I set out to write the book, I thought, all right, this is going to be one timeline, present tense, one character, easy. And then I think what happens to a lot of writers, it just that takes on a life of its own. It became two timelines. And then the wildest thing happened is that Larch's daughter, Emmy, was just going to be a background character, and then just kept kind of earning more and more spotlight, and then really stole the stage. And I credit that to just all the amazing kids I've worked with over the years, kind of compositing all the complexity that we all remember as being teenagers, into one character. But yeah, the long story short, um, yeah, installing solar panels at a time of a little bit of hope that made me think, what if I wrote a hopeful climate novel? What would that look like? And then 5 years later, here it is.
Well, we were talking about Emmy and the way you did her voice and the essays. That was just genius. I really, really thought that added a lot to the story.
Thanks. I'm glad you felt like that worked. I've corrected. So I teach fourth grade right now, but I have corrected. I've worked in high school and freshman of college, and so it was fun to be the teacher also because I've added so many marginal comments like that usually 99% go just like, all right, what's my grade? Just whipping through all the comments. So that was really fun. And a kind of a fun way to try. I guess my goal was to try to put in information about this world, but not make it a boring kind of like heavy science fiction book. And so yeah, that was a fun way to do it. And I've worked with just on Emmy's character, like I've worked with so many kids on so many different this whole spectrum. Like my wife's from California, so we lived in Los Angeles for a little bit, and I worked with some of the wealthiest kids in America, who I think most people would say they live in a utopia, and many of them just crippled by anxiety, like just couldn't stop going to school. And so I was a tutor then, and we were just restarting. And I've also worked with kids here in Maine at the juvenile prison. We have a state juvenile prison, kids who are just so traumatized and have, every right to be angry, but are also really funny and sarcastic and hopeful. And so it was the whole gamut of all those emotions and characteristics from the teenage years that went into Emmy. And I was so glad to see how she emerged. And that was a big help of a lot of early readers too, who were just kind of gently saying like, oh, we could use a little more Emmy. We'd love to hear a little more Emmy. And then I actually ended up rewriting the entire book to give her that much stage time, as I like to put it. But I'm glad you felt like those sections worked well. Thanks.
Yeah, I thought they were great. And I have so many questions, but I don't want to hog all the questions. So I will save some of mine and let everybody else ask questions, and I'll remember mine hopefully for a little bit.
Okay.
Michelle.
There was a quote that was driven home, I think, at just the right time in the book. You said more than one thing may be true at once. And I mean, here where I am, we're battling solar farms versus blueberry farmers and the lobster fishermen versus the California whale conservationists. And
Yeah.
I think in sort of rolling out Christina and Larch independently, I really felt like you allowed the reader to come to their own conclusions and realize that two things can be true at the same time. Was that, coincidence as to the timing of that, or was that sort of a premeditated reminder to make it more maybe available to different types of readers? Because I think there are a lot of people that are on the whole spectrum of the climate issue that could really appreciate the message of the book.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Michelle. That's such a great question. And I think I feel like it's not premeditated in the sense of trying to appeal or kind of leave it open to the broadest audience. But honestly, those two characters, Christina and Larch, I feel like are from my kind of split psyche and what I think a lot of people feel, where I experience like you're saying, all those things at once. I want to be doing both things at once. I want to be doing everything I can for the climate and for the future, for our niece and nephew just visited, and working with my students, I think about their future all the time and think about kind of in a Christina voice, like I should be doing more. But at the same time, I really want to enjoy life. And I want to, go on walks and make music. And it's hard to reconcile both of those things, I think, for a lot of people. I know certainly for me. So I think that was kind of a natural outgrowth of like a battle that's going on kind of in my own mind a lot. And then in different spaces I've been in, I've worked kind of, I'd say, more peripherally with different environmental groups because I've moved a bunch. and it seems to just be, just kind of an ongoing conflict or battle between, even in organizations, people thinking like, oh, we need to be doing so much more, and other people saying we need to be joyful in this, and we need to be enjoying life as well. And it's so hard, and I don't have any answers or know what to do, but I think if that answers your question, I think that was the outgrowth of that.
Thank you. It does. And that leaves you with a hopeful sense of realism too.
Sure,
Because
yeah.
we are complex people, and,
Right.
we don't have to be polarized, in on the spectrum.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Michelle.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and with respect to that too, we were talking a little bit before you hopped on, Nick, that it's the first story we can recall reading that's kind of past all of the climate issues.
Right.
And so that you've made it past, and there's now, we're on the other side of it, and that it's also a more hopeful story. So was that purposeful?
Sorry, Cindy, sorry. I'm so sorry. The first part of your question cut out.
Oh, no problem. I was
Sorry
just saying that we were talking ahead that it seemed like this is the first climate fiction story we could recall where it was past the climate trouble, like they've kind of made it past, versus a lot of the stories are right in the midst of the flooding or the fires or, whatever it is. And this was set post, the Great Transition. So I mean,
Yes.
you made it past it, and then it made it more hopeful because they
Mm.
kind of showed a way that people could make it past what was going to happen and go forward. And so was that purposeful?
Yeah, so I really wanted to write. Thanks. That's such a you hit the nail on the head in terms of when I originally set out. I didn't know what it would look like, but I really wanted to write a utopia, because when a lot of the books I enjoyed growing up, or more young adult books, were dystopias. There's just I love that genre, but there's a lot of dystopias out there, and I really wanted to write a utopia, but I had no idea what that would look like, because we learn, and like the same thing I teach my students in writing, all narrative is built on conflict, and what conflict could there possibly be in a utopia. And so one of the writers that I found a lot of inspiration in was Ursula K. Le Guin, the science fiction writer. And she has a really amazing utopia called The Dispossessed. And so, and as among many other utopias. And kind of what I learned, I felt like the lesson I learned from reading her work was that the conflict can come when the utopia is under threat. The utopia is built and under threat. And I did really want to paint that picture, what I kept thinking of as the best worst case scenario based on some of the science I was researching and reading. And I did want to paint a hopeful future, what things could look like, because like you're saying, I think we've all read, there's so much dystopian climate fiction, never mind dystopian climate nonfiction. Like most articles we read now, it's really, really despondent. My mother was just at a climate talk in Belfast where a scientist came, a NASA scientist, and he just laid out the science one after the other, this relentless like 2-hour presentation, and everyone was left feeling totally despondent. And someone was asking like, is there any hope? And I did want to show that from what I've read, and like there actually is a lot of hope. We have all the technology and resources that we could turn this around. And this was one example of what it might look like. And just as a side note, I heard this, it's kind of a similar vein, that so many rom-coms, which I also love, a good rom-com, end right when the couple like falls in love. But it leaves you wondering, well, like most of the relationship is what happens after that. And so I started thinking about it kind of in the same vein. That's like the messy, hard, beautiful stuff that I really wanted to show that afterwards, as well as like how we could get to the point. Because there are some climate utopia-ish books out there, but they'll start right after and not show kind of the transition. So that's my goal, to show both. But yes, definitely purposeful.
Well, and I think that's great because there was an article, maybe in the New York Times in the last couple of months, talking about that sometimes some of this climate fiction may be doing more of a disservice than a service because it makes people so depressed that there is no hope. So I think
Yeah.
you have stories where you feel like there is hope and things can go in a direction that at least, you know, we could live with that. And so I think that's what really resonated for me with your
Oh
book.
yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, I remember that article, and it's kind of like a you're just feeding into a lot of defeatism. I've heard that I've heard that argument starting to be made too for documentaries that have to do with the climate. It's kind of like, sadly, we all know at this point where things are going, and more another documentary on this is just, it gets to a point where it's so devastating, and we need to like focus a little more on what can happen.
Yeah. So it's not white noise.
Yeah, yeah.
Anybody else want to ask a question? No? Okay. Oh, go ahead, Valerie.
We really enjoyed all your use of music and especially having contemporary artists be. But the one person I wasn't familiar with was Valerie June. And of course, I noticed her name because we share a first name. And she was mentioned several times. So tell us about your connection to her music.
I love Valerie June. I've seen her live a couple times. She's just an amazing, optimistic, hopeful, kind of almost sprite-like, cheerful folk. I think, is considered more like folk. It's like country folk music. I had some friends who lived in Nashville, and so I was living there very briefly, and that's how I first learned about her. And so she'll play a lot on the folk scenes. She's probably, I'm guessing, in her 30s. Just very, I can't recommend her enough, especially if you ever get the chance to see her live. And so it was really fun thinking about Emmy's character and trying to imagine backwards decades, that some music now that we might be like, I can't bear to hear that again on the radio, could be kind of eclectic. Like, oh, this, I know the oldies, like, this is a cool thing. But it was funny. It was interesting to think how that could span from music that's really popular now, like Taylor Swift, but also more obscure artists like Valerie June, 50, 60 years from now, who knows? So that was fun I was glad to be able to sneak her in there too. And I was just thinking, I'd love to get her a copy of the book somehow.
Well, we talked about the music references and how much we enjoyed that and the oldies. So you raised a question that we also talked a little bit about, and I read the book a while ago. I kind of reviewed today, but when is it set exactly? Like, when would you say the time period was, the year or the years?
Yeah, so I really tried to, I have a timeline that but this is, I'm not sure if everyone knows, but this was my first novel. And so this was, every step of this has been brand new to me after the writing it, including this, like they just sent me this blow up book cover. Very cool. I'm not, so I just got it. You're all the first people to see it.
Yeah.
And so anyway, another step was the revision. The whole revision and copy editing was so fascinating to go through. The copy editing especially was really interesting. Can I just give you an example of how detailed they got?
Yeah, no, we
So
would love to, especially with this kind
okay,
of
so this
novel,
was,
I'm sure.
there's a scene when they are stuck in the Hyperloop station, Larch and Emmy, during a hurricane, and Emmy meets Rena and Angel for the first time. And then one of them goes to get, Rena goes to get McDonald's. And so in the original draft, for many drafts, she came back with onion rings. And the copy editor said, she said, I know this is a utopia, or I know this is set in the future, but McDonald's doesn't sell onion rings. Do they? Maybe they do in the future. I don't know. So that was a great catch. And then another towards the end, when Emmy gets into Dungeons and Dragons, which I know a little of. I used to teach an after school class, so I know a little bit about it, but not that much. It was some very obscure comment about a power that one character had, and I was slightly off. So the copy editor is so detailed. It was really, really fun. And one of the things that they were really, really looked into is the timeline, both in terms of the days. So they might say like, well, according to all the clues you've left, 3 days have passed, but you said it was 2 days later. That was really interesting. And then, so what it forced me to do was actually create an entire timeline, like day by day, but also year by year, to go through the transition. But I really wanted to not, I wanted to keep that off of the page because I didn't want it to be a distraction for readers. Because I don't know, I know if I saw a year, 2090, I would start thinking about the technology, especially, and think like, I don't know, this doesn't seem realistic based on what I've heard. So that's why I really purposely tried to keep all dates out of it, just to kind of streamline the readability of it. But when I was actually getting ready to set down and create an actual timeline, the present timeline is about like 2060, 2070, roughly. To answer your question in a very, very long-winded way. But I'd love to share those copy editing stories, because that's new to me, and I feel like, I don't know, I never knew that they did that kind of stuff before.
Well, and I figured that that's what was happening with the time, to not have people obsessed with how many years in the future it was. But I was curious where you found it landed. And I'm sure being a teacher, it also, the copy editing had to be interesting, just kind of the flip side of even just editing as well. You know, you're usually the one making comments, and now someone's making comments.
Yes, it was really interesting, and really interesting because like Larch's voice in particular, as I worked, writing the book for years and getting more and more into his voice, the voice I heard was almost like a stream of consciousness voice, the way he thinks. And so there's a lot less punctuation, many fewer commas when he's narrating. And so for the copy editor, this was kind of a nightmare. And it was, and they did add, there were times when I thought, okay, there does need to be a comma here. This isn't like an extreme, like no commas for Larch rule. But it was interesting, right? If I came from just teaching a lesson that day on using conjunctions to avoid run-on sentences, and then seeing it myself, yes, that was an interesting experience.
Mary Ann, did you have a question?
I did. I just want to come back to Emmy for a moment. And
Sure.
I was just curious if you took her eating disorder from children that you have worked with, high school students that you've worked with, or how you came about that, because you really did a great job on her eating disorder and being in her head for that eating disorder. You did a really excellent job on that. And I just was curious how you came to that.
Oh, thanks, Marianne. Yeah, that was based very heavily on my time, both in the main juvenile prison, and then also some close friends I have with children who are now grown and fine, but going through periods of very similar eating disorders to Emmy, and I felt like it just always just came down to not having a sense of control over life. And in the prison, that made a lot of sense. But it was really interesting seeing eating disorders and other manifestations like crippling anxiety coming about in families where kids you'd think have everything they need. And it was just really, I know we were all teenagers, and we remember it's just such an interesting age, because you start to have such a sense of agency, such a sense of like, this is my life, and yet so much of it is out of your control still, and being on that cusp can be really difficult. And then I think especially when there's so many societal problems going on, in the climate especially, I really, as a teacher too, I think about guns in schools, and I try to imagine what it feels like as a student, for these two big issues, to not where it's like the adults aren't doing anything, and that's got to be really scary. And sometimes you'll hear activists say, you know, the youth are the future, the youth need to lead the way. And I hear this sometimes as a teacher for gun safety, and it just seems so unfair to put that on children, well, when we're the adults and we should be doing something. And you hear that a lot in the climate too. And so I think it really came out of just what I've seen for what I think it is children feeling like they have no control both of their immediate lives and maybe also the wider world. And that is one of many kind of destructive ways that can manifest. But thanks, Marianne, for bringing that up, and I'm glad that it resonated.
And I really loved that how you wrote Emmy's voice, that she was not this obnoxious teenage angsty girl, because that is why I usually walk away from those books, is because authors tend to go down that path, and you made her very much real and someone that I could remember what that felt like when I was 17. And I just thought that was excellent, that you really gave her a great voice.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
I felt like, okay, Melody, I was like, I know I saw another hand. I want to make sure I didn't miss anybody. Melody.
Hi. Well, two questions. First of all, I'm curious as to why McDonald's lasted and like why you chose that. And also the choice for Greenland. Like, have you been there? Like,
yes.
Yeah, I'm curious on like the lands that you focused on.
Sure. Yeah. It was really fun. So to answer the McDonald's question first, it's just, I mean, I feel like we could imagine the end of nation states, but McDonald's will live on forever. You know, what an endearing symbol across the world. It was interesting to imagine. As I started researching the book and looking into different forms of economics, and started learning a lot more about worker cooperatives, which in this future, almost everything, at least in Emmy's world, is owned by worker cooperatives instead of corporations is the way we understand them. And so it was really interesting to start reading about different proposals that have been floated across the kind of the Western world for worker cooperative banks, where if a company was kind of going to go bankrupt, the workers would have the first choice to buy the company before it would be bought by someone else. And then actually this became more relevant recently, because Simon & Schuster, the company that's publishing my book, is been for sale for a few years now. And it was about to be bought by Penguin Random House, and that fell through. And now a venture capital firm, I think, is in the works. And so I started thinking too about, well, what would it look like if the employees bought the company and ran it? So anyway, that's just been on my mind. And so it was really fun to kind of pick and choose which companies could be around. And I just think McDonald's is so iconic. I couldn't imagine a utopia without it. Then for your other question, it brings up something so interesting about writing, and almost, I feel like almost mystical, which is when I'm working on a project for a really long time, it starts, the world just sends me things. And so it's kind of like when you learn a new word and start hearing it all the time. So I knew I wanted to write a climate crisis utopia, and it seemed like such a big lift. And I'd thought about it for a couple of years since I first had the idea, and would talk about it to people. And I was at my brother's apartment. He lives in Brooklyn, and he's an urban planner, and he got a newsletter from his graduate school. And I was just, as we were chatting, just rifling through it. And on the back was a book review by a very obscure urban planning architectural firm that had written a book, the kind of, you can imagine like architectural renderings. And their book was like, well, what if climate crisis is not stopped and the seas rise and everyone has to move towards the poles? What would that world look like from an architectural point of view? It was really fascinating. And one of the cities they chose was Nuuk, because it's set on the hillside. So it would be well above sea level rise. And so that I can't take any credit other than coming across this amazing book and it just unlocked so much for me and helped me envision what that world would really look like. But yeah, but no, I haven't been there. I would love to go. I would love to see the Northern Lights. I heard they're supposed to come to Maine this summer, but I don't know. That might just be a rumor.
Well, and side note, I used to live way interior China teaching English in the late 90s. And there was a McDonald's, and it was the best place to go for dinner.
Yeah, you see, yeah, there can be a world revolution, but McDonald's is sticking around.
That's so funny. I lived in Brazil when I was young, and they got their first McDonald's when we were there, and it was a huge thing. I still remember that. So yes, I guess it makes sense that McDonald's would always be present. Well, piggybacking on Melody's question, the world building, like I was curious about Greenland too, and we talked a little bit about that, but did it take a while to do all of the world building?
Yeah, it took a lot of research. Definitely. I mean, yeah, once I felt like that coming across that book kind of sent me down this path, and that led to more publications like that. I was really fun though, also. I, what I would do is read a lot about from scientists. Like there's a book called The Waters Will Rise, just about sea level rise. And then kind of extrapolate, okay, if that is what the world looks like, then I looked up, I was reading topographical maps of New York City that show all the different heights, and from that could kind of decide, so I think this hyperloop route would have to run through these stops because they'd be the only ones left. So that was really fun coming across pieces like that. And then I'd say like the other big world building from this would have been like the older timeline during the transition, because between Christina and Larch, and a lot of that came out of I've a lot of experience working in different kind of like relief, reconstruction or deconstruction. I went to New Orleans a year after Katrina and worked with this organization called Common Ground Relief. And it was very similarly structured. This was my first experience ever living in like a small mutual aid society. So we lived in this 3-story school that had been renovated. There's about 200 of us, and everyone had to do either cooking or security or cleaning shift a day. But you didn't have to. It was just kind of expected of you. And so things got done though, which was just amazing. And it was a little dirty around the edges, and sometimes breakfast wouldn't be made because people slept in. But overall, it was incredible to be a part of this, that it functioned. And then we go out every day and gut homes, wearing full Tyvek suits and respirators. And so a lot of those scenes, you probably start to sound familiar from the book, where we would be working all day and then, just soaked in sweat. But also really fulfilling at the same time. And then I read a lot of, I really love doing research by reading memoirs and just current events articles. So for a lot of Christina's story, including growing up in Mexico and then coming across, and her experience at the internment camp, essentially a refugee camp, just reading a lot about, like, sadly, about situations that exist now, both in the US and in Europe with migrants. And just I almost think about it like a quilt of all the different stories after I've kind of immersed myself in that and just synthesizing them all into a new experience.
Well, I was completely fascinated with New York City. My daughter goes to school there, and I really love the city. And so just your portrayal of what was going to happen there, and then the hyperlink and the bad storm and just all of it, I thought it was very creative. And what happens when Emmy goes back and sees Central Park. And I loved all of that. I just felt it was very immersive.
Oh, thanks. I mean, New York is similar to McDonald's in the sense it's hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine the North America without it. And I mean, all projections show that it is in for a very, very difficult future. But it seems like if a lot of resources are going to be spent for any area along the coast, that people are going to fight hard to save at least part of New York City. And so that was fun to imagine, which parts would be saved. and the battle over which became a battle, right? Are we going to save Wall Street or Hunts Point?
Yeah, I thought that was all very engaging.
Thanks.
Anybody else? I want to make sure I'm not missing anybody. Nope. Okay, I'm trying to think. I had one more question. We talked about the McDonald's, we talked about the world building. So you wrote about you found the place in Greenland, but actually creating it, like the steps and the way it all kind of worked, was that very similar, or did you take that and kind of run with it?
Yeah, you mean about how the city
Was set up, kind of not courtyard, but whatever you want to call it. Like it just kind of was up the hill.
Yeah, that was really, I mean, that was really fun to imagine. I don't know, I almost thought about it like a dream, where I would just first envisioning like the first scene. So they're in their room, their apartment, and then they leave. And what does it look like? What does that courtyard look like? And then if they're running up, and then it was so really fun to think about new terminology for the city, right? It's like up city, down city, because they're on a hill.
Right.
And so I'd say I kind of imagined it like, yeah, it was almost dreamlike. All right, like the world is being created as the characters would start to move through it. And then I think layered on top of that would be kind of like craft elements to help build the political and social and economic parts of the city as well. So like they're bringing one of their chores is bringing their compost to like the community compost area. We had a small one of those in Los Angeles, and I was imagining that on a whole citywide scale, or that it's never mentioned, but there's no cars. It's all very pedestrian, urban, mass transit friendly city. So it was fun to kind of imagine, what kind of city would I want to live in? What would be my best case?
Yeah, I loved all that. I think that was one of the things I liked so much, was just getting lost in all those details. And I figured it had to be really fun to create them.
Yeah, it really was. It really was.
So the thing I always want to talk about is covers. And I think your cover is stunning. Is this what it looked like from the beginning? Did you give any input? What was that process like?
All right, this is gonna sound like I asked Cindy to ask that question, because I don't know if you can enable screen sharing, but
I can certainly try.
for this,
Let's see.
I made a file with all the covers that.
Okay. Does anybody know how I do that? Because I'm happy to do it. I just don't know.
Yeah, sorry, I just don't see that button at the bottom.
Yeah,
To answer your question, this was.
Cindy, I think there's a button that maybe says security at the bottom.
Yes.
Click on that. And then click on allow screen share, and that should do it. See, we can't see it because we're not the host.
Okay, I can see enable waiting room, allow chat, rename themselves, share whiteboards. Would that be it?
No, it should
say. I don't have, let's see. Let me see if I go to participants. If I go to Nick. If I make you a co-host, can you do it then?
Yes.
I think so. I should know this since I taught for a full year on Zoom.
I made you a co-host. Let's see if that does it. And if that doesn't do it, then I'll keep looking.
I just Googled it and it says, like, tap security, toggle the share screen on to enable screen sharing for participants.
I don't have that. I have
I have security now.
You do? Okay.
Okay. Wait, sorry. Can you say that again? This is a true collaborative process here.
Well, so tap security and then tap on share screen.
Yeah, that's not an option.
Not there. Share whiteboards is there, and but there's no. Okay, and I gave Nick the.
Oh, it says it can be locked, or it's the group or account level.
What? Sorry, what a tease. Sorry, if I can't, I have it all queued up.
I'm
because
trying. I'm like seeing if I can figure it out.
Kind of a fun insight.
Well, if you have it as a PDF, you could email it to Cindy, and she could email it to us if we promise not to share it.
I am trying everything I can here to see if I can do it for
We're
you.
obviously very
Ah.
interested in this.
Okay,
I
I
know.
can
Grab a
okay.
mirror. All you need is a mirror to reflect, right?
Well,
I can
interesting. Yeah, I could.
I
Well,
can share screen under my settings. Are you still a co-host, Nick?
I believe so.
So go to your video settings, like where it says stop video, but
Yep.
click on the little arrow. And then what did I
Setting.
click on? Video settings. And then under video settings, there's share screen. Do you see it?
On the left hand. Oh, yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
So see if that maybe lets you do it.
Allow all sharing options.
I'm continuing to look here to see if I can, I don't know what all this whiteboard is. Is whiteboard the same as just sharing your screen?
No, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's like a whiteboard, like you can
Oh,
write.
okay. All right.
Yeah.
Huh.
Wow.
Well, Kelly
Sorry,
has an
y'all.
idea of maybe, can you take your phone or iPad and look at the screen and show us? Would that be like just reflecting it up to us?
All right. I'm for writing a book set in the near future. I'm not
don't have a
very
phone.
technologically. Wait, so you might have to walk me through this. I would on my phone. I have it as a Google. Yeah, maybe I could pull it off of my drive on my phone. That's not a bad idea. All right, let me try that.
Kelly.
Well, yeah. So to answer your question, of course, this is not one cover. And what I have a friend who's a journalist at New York Magazine, and his wife's an editor, and she at a different publishing house, and was saying that sometimes they'll just show an author two covers and choose one or not even. And I was really surprised because they were so involved, and they let me be so involved and give so much feedback, which is why I think I will show you. We had like six different options. All right, so I'm just looking it up here. All right, here we go. Here's a presentation. Okay, loading here, and I know, and they have a whole art department at in Atria. And then I think they were also combining it with footage, because the cover, it has a little bit of a feel, part of it, of like an architectural rendering. And so I think they were also using from some kind of architectural firm, maybe had created some of the art. I wasn't totally sure, but what I do know is it was never like, this is the one artist who made this. It always seemed like a very collaborative endeavor. All right, here we go. All right, I think we got it here. So this was the first cover. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the first one that they gave. And it was kind of given as like, this is the cover. Here it is. And I like the Northern Lights, but I just wasn't super crazy about it. And again, this is my first time going through this, and I've just been so grateful for every step of the way. Like, I never could have dreamt this even 5 or 10, certainly not 10 years ago. So I don't want to be ungrateful, but I was just giving my honest feedback. I didn't completely love it. So then they came back with 5 other options. And this was one of them. Oh, you know what I should also do? Sorry, let me turn is this really working?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Okay, and it's interesting.
No, I think it's really interesting.
Okay.
I'm all about the cover, so I'm gonna
All right.
always love it.
So then they came back with 5 new ones. That was one. And then some of them I thought looked a little too much like a nonfiction book, like this one, where I think like, oh, this is going to be about scientific economy. And some of them were very beautiful, but this one, I remember thinking this would be a really safe bet. And then they came back with this one. It was the first time they had this font.
And it wrapping, because that's what I was just gonna say. I
Yes.
love
Yeah,
the
yeah, so
wraps.
interesting. And they had it with the Northern Lights, and then they had these structures here. And I'm gonna zoom way in because this was funny back and forth. You can see there's 3 figures, and at first there was just one. And I thought this book is really about a collective mobilization of humanity. And this cover feels kind of lonely and isolated, like a dystopia. And so then they added 2 more figures so that at least there's kind of a family, but it still wasn't really cutting it. And then they came with this one, which looks a lot more familiar, where the coloring was different. And then they kind of combined the wraparound font with this one. And then there was some issue which I could not wrap my mind around, why this coloring could not be used. It was some legal issue.
Oh,
And
really?
I love the one they came up with is a little more muted.
Yeah.
And so I really like, I love it. I feel like it's wonderful and so beautiful. But it was such a journey. And I'm glad I could share that with you. Thanks for whoever thought of that that hack there.
Yeah, Kelly, thank you. That was a great suggestion. Because I always love to hear about covers because there's so much more that goes into them most of the time. And I think you don't always realize that. I mean, everybody here does because I talk about it all the time, but it's interesting to see how the progression, and I just love the way it wraps. You just don't see that very often. I think, and also it just matches the story. It's a beautiful cover.
So glad you think so. I was really, I was I don't know. I've just been both excited and nervous about every step of this. And so same with the wraparound title, was both thinking like, oh, is this, is this going to work? But like so many things, I have so much faith in readers. And I know my experience as a reader, when I piece something together that isn't spoon fed to me by the author, there's a real sense of it's like, oh, I figured this out, or this feels really, it's this a little sense of accomplishment. So I keep that in mind when I'm writing a lot too, just the kind of books that I like to read. And especially for this book, it could have been so easy to ruin it by over explaining how the politics of like, how does the world work right now? Which I'm sure a lot of people wonder. Like my uncle read an early copy of it, and he's I think a very serious man, and he just really wanted to know like, how does the government, who's in charge? I think that's what it came down to. And so I knew, I can't over explain. I just have to have faith that I would enjoy kind of piecing together this world from the points of view of these characters, and I know readers who will enjoy it will as well.
Yeah. I think that's exactly right. And some of it depends on what kind of story you're writing, and I think you're writing this type of story versus one where you're going to detail every little aspect of their lives. But I will tell you, I love your publicist. I work with her regularly when she was elsewhere, and now that she's at Atria. And when she first pinged me, I had just seen your book somewhere else, and she said, this is probably one of my very top reads I've ever worked on. So she's like, you really have to read it. And I was like, I just saw it someplace else and it sounded great. So she's definitely high behind you.
She's wonderful. Holly's wonderful. The whole team. I mean, writing's so solitary. And when I set out to write this, like, never thought it would actually be published. I think like people's first books, it's such an act of faith that for all I knew, no one would even ever read it. Like, I wish all the books I had done research for, all the books I had researched, and I wish I had kept them all. I just thought that would be kind of a nice small library to show and have. But I would put them in free libraries after I was finished taking all my notes, because I don't know, I never thought it would actually get to this point. But so much, what I was saying is so much is solitary, but now I'm seeing how much goes into a book. It's incredible what a team, between the editor, the publicist, the marketer. I came in to meet everybody, and I met, a person who's in charge of sales for airports, and another person in charge of sales for Target and big box stores. And it's just such a huge team effort. It makes me think that books should have like credits, like a movie does, where they give everyone credit. Because even as a writer, I didn't know this many people were involved. So it's been so sweet, and the team, they've been so wonderful.
Oh yeah, Michelle says, should we take a pic? That's a great idea. Let's take a picture really quick. I'm going to get it. I always have to remember how to do that. Okay, everybody ready?
Well, let me hold up a new copy.
Okay, and now I've got to remember, is it Shift Command 4, Shift Command 3? Oh, there we go, Shift Command 3. Okay, everybody ready? I know I can't hold up my book because I'm taking the photo. Ready? Great, good. Well, thank you, Michelle, for the reminder. And thank you so much, Nick, for joining us. This was wonderful. We just so enjoyed it. We really appreciate your time. And I know your book is just going to be out there with everybody reading it and loving it.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Cindy. Thanks to all of you. And this is really special. This is the first book club I've been a part of from this end of things. And just so grateful. Thanks for inviting me in.
We'll
Really
get used to it. You're going to be asked to a lot of other ones. I can guarantee
You
you.
are. Melody dropped one more quick question in. She wanted to know what you were working on next. Do you have a minute to answer that?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So one thing I've been doing a lot of small nonfiction pieces related to the book because it brought up I could talk about this for hours. It brought up so many pieces from like, all right, one example is a big one that I really started thinking about justice and like the justice as a human need, maybe. And I started thinking about in my classroom, I use restorative justice, which is a series of questions we ask. We call it, I wouldn't use these words to the kids, but the perpetrator and the victim, and they come together and they admit feelings of guilt and shame and how they may have hurt somebody, and then they work together to come to a solution. And when it works, it's so amazing. It's so great because kids who are being kind of bullies, they get to hear how much it hurts people. And also, we've all done things we feel bad for, and how great it feels to be able to say you're really sorry and get that off your chest. But when it doesn't work, I just notice that injustice just festers in the classroom and will come up in all sorts of ways. And so between that and then thinking about this book and justice and wondering about, like, on a societal level, if justice is not had in some way, like what happens? You know, a lot of people think after the Great Recession that a lot of there's no bankers were ever charged with anything or held accountable, and that kind of has festered and led to like a lot of the divisions and polarizations we see now. So anyway, and then I started finding research of social scientists who were looking into like, oh no, justice is a human need that should be on the hierarchy of needs, like up with, you know, there's shelter and food and clothing, and then self-actualization, and that justice should be up there. So anyway, I've been writing kind of little pieces like that. On a lighter note, I just finished one that Holly, the publicist, was pitching the Rolling Stone about music and the end of the world, and looking at like some of the great endings of TV and movies and pop culture songs that were used, and how what could our song be as a society based on if we're going to have like a hopeful end to the season or a doomsday end or kind of something in the middle. So that was a little more fun. But then I'm working on a new novel that actually Atria is going to publish. I'm well underway and excited about it. So I'm not sure when that will be, but sometime in the distant future.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's great news. I always love hearing that.
Yeah.
And we'll have to keep an
Thank
eye
you.
out on the Rolling Stones.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you again. You all always have a special place in my heart as the very first book club that ever I get to be a part of. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Well, and thank you too, and take care and good luck with everything.
I'll see you in Belfast, Nick.
Yes.
Thank
See you in
you.
Belfast. That would be great. All right. Take
I'm
care.
coming.
Oh, thanks. Bye,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.